Hi, everyone. It's Carrie. Today marks the 100th episode of the LiberatED podcast, which I launched back in February of 2022 as a once-a-week podcast and boosted to a twice-weekly show last fall because there are just so many stories to tell of the entrepreneurial parents and educators who are transforming U.S. K-12 education from the bottom up. Thank you so much for listening, sharing, and supporting this podcast. I am so grateful. In recognition of this milestone, I thought I would share a few reflections. I recall my very first podcast episode with Jill Perez, a longtime public school teacher in New Jersey, who, like so many of the founders I've interviewed, never thought that she would become an education entrepreneur. COVID was the catalyst. She created a pandemic pod in 2020 that by the fall of 2021 had evolved into an established microschool, Tranquil Teachings Learning Center, with nearly 50 kids in a leased space with hired educators, including several former teachers from the New York City public schools who were burnt out. As in many microschools across the country, the students who go to Jill's microschool are technically homeschoolers who can attend part-time as a supplement to their homeschooling, or all week as a flexible full-time schooling alternative at a fraction of the cost of traditional private schools. I thought about Ada Sali, episode number 13, an entrepreneurial parent in Massachusetts who galvanized families during that first year of COVID lockdowns and then launched her microschool, Life Rediscovered, in the fall of 2021. A year later, she thought she might have to shut down entirely because entrepreneurship is hard and education entrepreneurship is even harder. But she persevered and is now opening multiple locations of her programs throughout Massachusetts, buoyed by unrelenting parent demand, as well as philanthropic support from the Vela Education Fund. I thought about Laurel Suarez in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, episode number 45, who launched her program, Compass Outreach and Education Center, in 2019, and was one of the first microschools in South Florida to participate in the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship Program, enabling low-income students to attend her program tuition-free. Since then, microschools and education entrepreneurship have exploded in the greater Fort Lauderdale area, with Laurel helping to incubate several successful microschools since 2020, including Iman Aline's Kind Academy, episode number 41, which is rapidly scaling and receiving national recognition as a model microschool. As if entrepreneurship isn't hard enough, Fort Lauderdale was hit last month with a devastating, record-breaking flood that destroyed much of Laurel's microschool property. Did I mention that entrepreneurship is hard? I think that's why I am so driven by this work of telling the stories and sharing the joys and challenges of these ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things to help children be happy, curious, thoughtful, confident, fulfilled, and free humans. I thought about my visit to James Lomax's Acton Academy affiliated microschool, Life Skills Academy in Las Vegas, that I wrote about at Forbes and Fee.org. James was on podcast episode number 76. He wanted to open as a recognized K-12 private school so that his students could have access to his state's small school choice scholarship program. But Nevada has some of the strictest educational, occupational licensing and accreditation requirements in the U.S., preventing those without a state teacher or administrator license from opening a secular private school. He forged ahead in the spirit of permissionless innovation and opened Life Skills as a microschool for homeschoolers. Life Skills now joins roughly 25 other microschools within a 10-mile radius of the Las Vegas Strip, serving more than 300 learners. Dawn and Ashley Soifer, episode number 15, who run the Las Vegas-based National Microschooling Center, predict that that number will grow to more than 600 learners in the Las Vegas Valley over the next year. Finally, I thought about episode number 39 when I interviewed Mimsy Sadovsky, co-founder of the famed Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts, that I wrote extensively about in Unschooled. It was founded in 1968 and has inspired the growth of dozens of Sudbury model schools around the world that are deeply committed to non-coercive, self-directed learning. In that episode, I shared how the education disruption caused by the COVID response personally affected my family, altering our city homeschooling experience, including the microschool my kids had attended pre-pandemic, and prompting us to enroll our kids at Sudbury Valley instead, which has been such an amazing gift in so many ways. I think that's perhaps my biggest takeaway from these past 100 episodes. The education disruption caused by the COVID response was exceptionally hard on many parents and learners, but it has unleashed an unprecedented period of education innovation and experimentation that is creating more learning options for more families and is encouraging more parents to think differently about their children's education. It prompted people to take a leap, whether as entrepreneurial parents and teachers building new K-12 prototypes, or as moms and dads who felt free to try something new and different. In both of those instances, I hear few regrets from the entrepreneurs I interview and the parents I talk with. Most are elated that they took that leap. I too am happy, not only for our own family's educational leap, but for the leap I took in launching this podcast 15 months ago. I honestly didn't know where this endeavor would go or if anyone would even listen. But thanks to you, the podcast consistently ranks in the top 5% of all podcasts globally, according to data from Listen Notes, receiving thousands of downloads each month. I'm so glad you're listening, hopefully learning, and maybe thinking about your own entrepreneurial or educational leap. I'm looking forward to the next 100 episodes. I hope you are too. And if you haven't already signed up for my weekly email newsletter that's a complement to this podcast, I hope you will. You can do that by visiting fee.org/liberated. That's FEE.org/liberated.